great to be here among friends. It's great to be able to share some of the work that I've been doing more recently about the outing system at the Carlisle Indian School. And I know most of you have seen there's a handout that lists the names of the families in Cumberland County. And they're organized by location and they show the numbers of outing assignments that were found in each of those households. So I'm just going to introduce you to some of those people and some of the children who were in their homes. So before I start that program, though, I want to give you a little idea of about what outing was, and I'm going to use John Sayles' recent novel, which I absolutely love. And if any of you are interested in looking at this history through um, the eyes of the novelist, and especially the great writer John Sayles, I encourage you to get a hold of this book, To Save the Man, which was recently published. John started as a filmmaker, hoping to make a film about the Indian School. And over the course of about 20 years of research and connections with descendants, this book evolved, this novel evolved. So I'm going to set the scene for about 1890. It's 1890. It's during the time in our country, during the ghost dance craze, when just preceding the Wounded Knee Massacre. And Richard Henry Pratt, who founded the Indian School in 1879, is being courted by a reporter who's looking for a sensational story to write about. What else is new, right? So it is clear to Captain Pratt that the reporter has already written his article, at least mentally, and is only trying to provoke him into saying something outrageous. Two can play at the game. If I had my way, there would be no Carlisle School, the captain tells him as they walk briskly toward the trade buildings. These young men and women should be placed in white communities with white families, attending local schools, immersed in our culture. He maintains a pace that the newspaper man, a stubby little fellow, struggles to match. Then why aren't you doing that? Because it is unfortunately impossible, especially in the West, where more recent hostility between the races has left prejudices firmly entrenched and tempers aflame, with great justification. What we offer here at Carlisle as an alternative is our outing program. Students board at area farms, living and eating with the families, earning their keep through domestic or agricultural labor. Very courageous of their hosts. The reporter is from a news journal that once criticized the captain for attempting to revive a savage and, one must say, justly exterminated race. The captain assumes their editorial policy is unaltered. The hosts are chosen as carefully as the students. We visit the home, assure ourselves that the cleanliness and moral standards are acceptable. And these students are able to speak? Some are still struggling with the acquisition of our tongue. They must be shown their tasks as well as having them explained. You'll see the same principle applied to some of our boys in the carpentry shop. The newsman raises a hand before Pratt can open the door to the shop. The sounds of hammering and sawing, the music of industry always comfort him when he looks in here. This so-called ghost dance that has the Western tribes on the warpath. Ah, the point of his inquisition. What of it? Any stirrings of unrest among your charges? What you refer to is an unfortunate but understandable delusion that has affected a relative handful of those held on our reservation prisons. They dream of otherworldly deliverance, just as a convict dragging a ball and chain might dream of escape. It will come to nothing and has no bearing on our mission here. So Captain Pratt emphasizes the importance of total immersion in the white world. And that was his goal. And that was always the goal of the experiment here at Carlisle between 1879 and 1918. So I chose this image to start with to give you a sense of how that immersion looked to a group of Blackfeet chiefs who visited Carlisle in 1913 for the commencement exercises. So, as you know from that reading, students, or you may not know, students had academics for half a day at the Carlisle Indian School, and then they had trades for the other half day. So half of the school population was learning reading, writing, arithmetic in the mornings, and the other half was learning reading, writing, arithmetic in the afternoons. And then they switched off and they learned trades during the other part of the day. And the trades were, as you heard in that reading, carpentry, blacksmithing, all of the typical trades you would expect boys to be learning at the turn of the century. And then for girls, the trades would have been the domestic arts, which would have been typical probably of any school during that era. So in the summertime, when you would expect a kid to go home from boarding school, these children were enrolled at first for a period of 3 years and then later for a period of 5 years, and they did not go home. Instead, they were sent out with a capital O into non-native families to live and work and spend all their time completely immersed in the white world. These children were sent out into European American families who were typically Protestant. There were some of the local Catholic community tried hard to lobby Pratt to get his placed in Catholic um, households also, but they really ran up against a lot of resistance. So I wanted to use this image to kind of reinforce what Pratt told a group of Baptist ministers in 1883. He wrote, "In Indian civilization, I am a Baptist because I believe in immersing the Indians in our civilization, and when we get them under, holding them there until they are thoroughly soaked." So there's that analogy to drowning. And we know of these other very violent metaphors that Pratt used, kill the Indian, save the man, that we associate with this experiment. So, as I mentioned, my interest now is to explore the outing system because I really want to know what was happening in the European American culture. What were the white families thinking about? How were they involved in this role of immersion with Indian kids? So I developed a spreadsheet and pulled from a database that I had inherited from my anthropologist friend, Genevieve Bell, who I first started working with in the early 1990s. And I found over 15,300 outing assignments of a student population of about 7,800 kids. So that means that every single Indian student at Carlisle either had multiple outings and there were many children who had no outings. So some of them had as many as 5, 6, 7, 8 outings. So there were kids who enrolled at the Carlisle Indian School who really spent very little time here in our community in the classroom. They were out, and many of them, if they were young, were sent to public schools with their non-native brothers and sisters. So if you look at this listing, it gives you a sense of how kids were distributed on outings. And of course, the bulk of them were in Pennsylvania. We know of there are about 5,000 patrons or families or farms uh, in Bucks County that had children, and which really fit the profile that we know about who was influencing the staff and these children. And they were mostly Quakers. Pratt loved to put kids in with Quaker families because the Quakers were law abiding and they practiced temperance, which was a major important part of the project. They didn't smoke, they didn't drink, and they spoke good English, unlike some of those Catholic people who came from who were immigrants. So the Quakers really, I recently did a program in Biglerville about all the outings along the railroad between Carlisle and Gettysburg, and they were all Quaker families that own those orchards that we go to up and down along the railroad. So, but there were like 1,000 in Montgomery County, about 1,500 in Chester County. I found a total of almost 900 in Cumberland County. And those were distributed among about 350 families and businesses. So let's look at some of those in Cumberland. Now you have this handout that has a list of the families and where they were located in Cumberland County. And so the ones that really jumped out to me as I was developing this were the ones near where I live, of course, because I know that landscape. But I found 39 outings with a farmer named John Ludt, Ludt. And he lived these outings were in both New Kingston and in the Bonnybrook area. And I think that area is that area right where they're redoing that beautiful stone house, that stone property. So there were a lot of boys that actually were sent out there. There were 28 female students sent to live with Mrs. William McCrae, who was a former teacher at the Indian School. And Mrs. McCrae's granddaughters are Margot, who owned the Animal Inn. You might know that family. And Becky Smith, who taught water aerobics at the Y for years. So, I mean, there are people in our neighborhoods who are tied to these families. There were 22 boys in the household of a man named George Hilton around the time between 1891 to around 1904. 17 with Charles Otto in Boiling Springs, 16 with Edward Smith in Oakville, 14 with Mrs. Elizabeth Garland in Carlisle. And I'm thinking somebody might know that family because there's a Garland Drive, right? So, and then 13 in the family of J.B. Zimmerman in Churchtown. So those are the ones that really stood out to me because there were multiple students in those families. But as I said, the very first outing that I looked at was there were 3 outings in Uriah, Pennsylvania. I don't know if y'all know where Uriah is. Well, if you go to Gardner's, actually my street, Frost Road, empties out into Uriah. It's where Goodyear Road and Frost Road come together. There's the Uriah Methodist Church there and the cemetery. And that community was named after Uriah Gardner's. And they had, and it was the Peters family who still have property right in that area, the Peters Orchard family. Susan Peters was Mrs. Foster Ansley. And here you see the outing evaluation for Mrs. Ansley, who had a girl in her home. And it was Clemence Luttrell who you saw in that very first slide with the Blackfeet Chiefs. So the Peters had girls in their family. They had three during that outing. And then I was really interested in this Lutt family. And I remember years ago, Betty Jane Lutt came and visited us here at CCHS, and she had a photograph of a boy in her family who was an Indian boy. And that was the outing, one of the outings that Mr. Lutt had. So I'm always hoping that people might have photos in their collections of Carlisle students. I mean, just think of, almost 1,000 kids in our community lived with families that we're all connected to, or many of us are connected to, I should say. Um, so we were very lucky. I don't know if that photo is in our collections. It might be in the collections. I didn't check that out, but could be. Okay, so anyways, John Lutt, as you can see by the number of outings, these boys in the family came from 20 different nations. And so, this is like a virtual United Nations of nations in our little community. Today we have that experience at the Army War College. We have many, many visitors and students and connections with other nations. Well, just think, between 1879 and 1918, there were people who spoke different languages, had different cultural experiences, all among these children who were enrolled at Carlisle. So I sorted the outings at Bonnybrook by names. And I found that two students with John Lutt had back-to-back outings. So they were in the household, and then a kid went home for a few days and then went back into the Lutt family for another few months. So there were, those kind of experiences also can kind of tell you what was going on in the households. And then I organized the Lutt outings by their dates to the country. And so I found 28 outings from November 23rd, 1903 to August 30th, 1913, not including the New Kingston outings. All of them were boys except for 4 girls who were in that household. So the boys would have been working on the farm and the girls would have been cared for in the house. One of the girls I know was ill. So I believe she was there to kind of what Pratt used to call rusticate, or, be cared for in a more country setting. Sorry, I'm having some allergy issues here. I hope I don't lose my voice. All right, so then this is another set of that same spreadsheet of John Lutt's outing boys, and it's organized by the length of the stay. So the top 3 on the list were only there for a couple of days. The bottom 6 were in the household for 9 months to over a year. Artemis Harris was there for 2 years and 4 months while being cared for by Mrs. Lutt. That is the little girl that I mentioned was there to kind of rusticate. This is a photo of Indian school teachers that was taken between 1886 and 1889. You can see they're mostly women. Many are Quakers. And they're posed right by the original bandstand. So you all know the campus over there. That bandstand is still there. Um, but one of the teachers, Miss Catherine Jane Wiest, who was in service at this school between 1891 and 1896, left the Indian school and she went to Metzger College for a short time. And then she married William McCrae from Newville. And after she married Mr. McCrae, she had 28 female students in her home after setting up housekeeping in Newville. So in this slide, I'm sure you can't read it very clearly, but all of these documents, original documents that you're seeing, are available and accessible online at Dickinson College's Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center. So you can go online and type in any name and get information about these students or the outing families. But the outing that you see on the left, the outing evaluation, it describes what Mrs. McCrae's house was like and where the Indian school girl lived, what floor she lived on. She most likely went to Big Spring Presbyterian Church, which is where the McCraes were active. And she was her role there was as a general helper, and she generally helped Mrs. McCrae and her husband and their 7 children. Yeah. So, yeah, Jane McCrae left Carlisle and really had a big family. um, the other outing that you see in the middle is of Mary Marcotte. Mary Marcotte was Chitimacha. And unlike Jessie Daisy, who was Chippewa, Mary Marcotte was completely untrainable, according to the evaluation. And unfortunately, the Mrs. McCrae, who was a consummate trainer, was not able to train Jessie Daisy. And so that was not a happy situation. But I also set up a spreadsheet to give you a sense of in the McCrae household, there were these girls there all the time between what 1902 and 1913 or 12. I can't read it from here. 18. But at all times there was a girl in that household helping Mrs. McCrae. So that was the total immersion of girls at Carlisle in that family. There was another girl in Newville. Her name was Josie Vetter, and she was with the J. Brewster family during the summer of 1882. And then after she finished in that family, she was transferred to the Laughlin family, where she worked in the household there for 2 years. So again, you have this long spread of time when these girls are actually working as indentured servants, basically. And if they were old enough, they were getting paid a minimum wage, and they were required to save half that wage, but they could spend the other half. And when they departed from the Indian school after their time of enrollment was up, their funds were supposed to be returned to them. I wanted to show you Rachel Chakotay. Rachel Chakotay was out with Mrs. McCandlish for the summer of 1892, and then she was with the James Sharp family in the summer of 1893. And her friend Eliza Bell was out with the McCandlishes from September of 1882 through March of 1883, and then with the Thomas Myers family in Newville from March 83 through March 84. So there's a lot of fluidity happening. These girls are going from family to family. They probably are gathering together in church and in social situations in the small community of Newville while they're there. Rachel Chakotay when she finished at Carlisle, she was living in Holdenville, Oklahoma. Most of the kids at the Carlisle Indian School who were enrolled there went back to their home communities, which was not Pratt's goal. Pratt really wanted them to find work and get positioned in the non-native world. He wanted them not back at the reservation. He really decried the reservation system, as did most of the progressive reformers of that time. But almost all of them went back, except for the football players who were very accomplished, and many of them graduated. So they really had a different experience at Carlisle. But Rachel Chakotay went back, and I wanted to show you her great granddaughter, Joy Harjo. I don't know if that name is familiar, but Joy Harjo was the poet laureate for the United States. I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. She's an amazing poet, and she is also a musician, and she's very, very famous. That's the granddaughter of Rachel Chakotay, who got her training in Newville, right? And then there's Craighead, right? Craighead. Uh, Children in the homes of Charles or Mrs. Charles or Richard or Mrs. Richard Craighead were also placed there from the Carlisle Indian School. They're also with the Walter Lynn and McCullough families. And you can see Mrs. Craighead visited the Indian School in October 1882. And then Dr. Craighead and his wife visited the school in March 1883, according to the newspaper, The Morning Star. These are the outings at Craighead Station, mostly with Charles and Richard Craighead family. Longest outing with Charles Craighead was Bessie Owen for 21 months. And the average stay for a girl in Craighead was 4.5 months. Out of the 21 students, 14 were females, 7 were males. The average ages, female was 17. The average age of males was 16. The youngest was 12, a boy who was 12. The oldest was an 18-year-old boy. The youngest girl, 14. The oldest girl was 21, which wasn't unusual. Many of the students at the Carlisle Indian School were older, in their late teens or early 20s, while they were enrolled there. I also found, it might have jumped out at you, that there was the Zemer family, not the family, but Susan Zemer, who was Jerry Zemer's sister. Do you all know who Jeremiah Zemer was? Yeah, I see heads nodding. Yeah, so a lot of the information we have here in our collections include research by Jeremiah Zemer. There's a lot of amazing historical work that was done by him. And his sister Susan was an Indian school patron, and she had a daughter, and her daughter's name was Anna Wilson. As far as I know, from exploring the census and going through ancestry, Susan Zemer was always single. So I'm not sure what the situation was there, because she had this daughter who married a man named Wilson. And then there are a couple of generations of Wilson that are still in that same general area. So, but the two boys that Susan had in her household were Charles Foster, who was Alaskan. There were almost close to 1,000 Alaskan natives who were sent to the Carlisle Indian School. And the other student was Jose Prado, who was from the Puerto Rican tribe. And there are about 50 Puerto Rican students who were sent to the Indian School right around the time of the Spanish-American War. So, that's another whole story. But Susan Zemer would have been about 60 years old. And And I'm guessing the other lady in her household might have been her widowed daughter. This is an outing contract. So if you were a kid at the Indian school, you made a contract with the superintendent of the school and with the student who was going to be in your household. And there were certain set of rules that you had to follow. So you had to promise that there would be no smoking or drinking in the household. You promised that the kid would not ever go to Philadelphia. That was one of the rules. There were certain rules that they had to abide by. And this outing contract is available online too at the site that I mentioned. That's an example of a student card that you would see if you went online onto the Digital Resource Center. It would give you the name of the student, the nation, his height, weight, age at arrival, and it would list the outing patrons in that house. I also did a deep dive into the Hilton family, George Hilton, because they had so many students in that household. And so again, there were students in this particular household, which was located about 2.5 miles southeast of Carlisle around, on the Petersburg Road. And they had a farm that was called the Oaks. And they always had boys in the household. The father died after about 2 years of outings. The first outing was, I think, 1887, and then the father of the household, the patriarch, died, and the next generation continued to have boys in the household the whole time, and even one of the single daughters kept boys in the household. And then they lost the farm and they moved to Carlisle, and they continue to have boys in the household. So, you know, there's definitely a story there that has yet to be uncovered with George Hilton family. George and Susan. I found the only thing I could find about what happened to George, the son, was he was a very, very popular decorator. He decorated all the windows for the stores, planks, and all of the not dime store, department stores in Carlisle and grocery stores. And then he had a confection shop on High Street that he ran. And then he just disappeared. But I found his daughter, Susan, and it turns out that she died in the Harrisburg State Hospital. So, you know, again, I'm not sure what happened with the rest of the family, but um, they certainly were splintered by that time. This is an image of the online site where you can go to www.carlisleiindian.dickinson.edu and explore any of this information if you want to go further. Just a few more names of families that you might recognize. Mrs. Giles Flower she lived in Harrisburg, but her son Milton, who lived in Carlisle and is one of the trustees emeritus, I guess is that what you would call, of the Historical Society, and was a very important presence for a long time during my early years of working here. There is an oral history in the collections, an interview with Milton Flower, and he talks about the Carlisle Indian School girl that lived in their household. And I'm going to assume that was in Harrisburg, but it could have been in Carlisle. My memory is a little fuzzy about that. Also, Reverend Norcross had 3 Indian school kids in his household, and Reverend Norcross was really a major, major influencer at the Indian school, and most notably because his brother-in-law was Sheldon Jackson, who had founded several Indian schools in Alaska. And Sheldon Jackson was a Presbyterian missionary that recruited Indian school kids from the Pueblos And if you look at the list of names of the Pueblo students at Carlisle, many of them have the surnames of Presbyterian missionaries who had mission to Zuni and Taos and all those Pueblos. Oops, keep doing this. The other one I want to mention is George Diffenderfer. I don't know if you all know that name, but Reverend Diffenderfer recruited students for Carlisle. He's noted for taking lantern slides out west to the reservations and showing images on teepees to recruit students for Carlisle. And he himself had several students in his home.